Good morning, everyone. My name is Chiwen from the College of Foreign Languages and Literature, Furen University. It is my great honor to introduce Professor Sebastian Hsien-hao Liao. As you all know, he's the Dean of the Institute of the Advanced Studies in the Humanities and Social Sciences. But apart from that, Professor Hsien-hao Liao also served in many distinguished roles. He's Distinguished Professor of English and Comparative Studies in National Taiwan University. After he has received his PhD from Stanford University, he also served as the postdoctoral fellow at Harvard University. In 2018, he won the Outstanding Research Award from the Ministry of Science and Technology in Taiwan. Also, he has been chief editors of 3 distinguished journals, literary journals in Taiwan, and he was the president of the Comparative Literature Association of Taiwan, among others. Recently, he has been elected president of Taiwan Center of Pen, and then he's currently working on 2 books, Deleuze and Taoism and The Invisible China. My personal comment on Professor Hsien-hao Liao is that he's a perfect example of an organic intellectual. One of his great contributions to Taiwan is that he takes his specialties to different aspects of cultural life, including essay writing, serving as the director of the Bureau of Cultural Affairs in Taipei, and then also writing essays and leading movements in response to the government policy of language policies, and also organizing seminars in response to the challenge Gen AI has posed to the humanities. And my personal appreciation of Professor Liao is that he has been doing all of these with not only vigor, but also joy of life, joie de vivre. Usually joining his sessions will be a great pleasure of mine. Thank you. Let's welcome Professor Hsien-hao Liao and his title, The Poetics of Wound, Artistic Reciprocity Between the Techno-Thing and the Human Being.
Well, thank you very much, Kate, for your very generous introduction. I'm not quite sure if I deserve so much, But once again, I'd like to thank the College of Foreign Languages and Literature for co-sponsoring this very, very important event. And also thank you for chairing this session for me. With you, I feel very secure. All right. It's difficult to outperform Ian. Where is he? He's gone. That's good. Because he's such a suave speaker. And I'm just going to basically read from my draft. Like Kate just mentioned, in the past few years, I've been my academic research has been focused on objects, especially life of the objects. And in the last couple of years, my focus has been narrowed down on AI or techno-things. And I've been thinking about all these issues, whether or not AI can do evil spontaneously, whether or not AI can actually create out of its own accord. And most recently, these issues, thinking about these issues, has led me to the topic I will be talking about today. That is, how should we relate to the techno things? I mean, it's very easy to say that we can. It's easier said than do. We usually just use these techno things. But on the other hand, we actually have witnessed a very kind of serious fetishistic tendency among the human beings who are using techno things, because they just treat these techno things as fetishes, fetishes, yeah. Which means that their life has been absorbed into these things, having lost their freedom and self. So that's what I'm going to talk about. Is there an appropriate way of relating to the techno things? The fact that digital things have overwhelmed our environment and penetrated deeply into our lives has prompted prophetic voices to give somber prognoses with such concepts as the society of control and the automatic society, among other things. The increasingly popular deployment of apocalyptic terms like techno-opticon and the techno-scene further underscores this cultural anxiety. Most recently, the power of generative AI caps it off by amplifying Baudrillard's theory of the hyperreal exponentially. In view of this formidable techno-power that is reshaping human existence and impacting the environment, how to negotiate the relationship between the human being and the techno-thing has become a matter of escalated agency. To tackle this issue, we need to look at how the idea of technology has evolved. Thanks to Heidegger, it has become common knowledge by now that the Greek word techne, or techne, originally had a semantic field that covers both art and technology, since there was no division of labor between the two yet. And according to Heidegger, in either case, techne, its most important function was aletheia, or revealing being or concealment, except that they reveal being in different ways. The most technology-oriented tend to reveal being by means of analytic thinking or Gestalt, which initiated the development of metaphysical language, whereas the art-oriented would reveal being by means of poiesis or poietic disclosure. After the advent of modernity, the Gestalt nature of technology was foregrounded and began the ever-extensive human impingement on nature. I know it's controversial to use the word nature. Turning the other, the human or non-human, into standing reserve, whereas art has been relegated to a rarefied environment where only the rich and leisurely can have access to it, despite Benjamin's thinking in the opposite direction. The danger, Heidegger has warned us, is that the Gestalt nature of modern technology has made us forget that there are other ways of revealing nature. Beginning my talk with Heidegger does not mean that I completely agree with his understanding of art, and for that matter, of techniques in general. In fact, what I'm going to do here is precisely to propose a different way of understanding the function of art, and therewith a different understanding of technology as well. It is different, so that we can catch, my approach is different, so that we can catch up with how we cope with the increasingly autonomous development of technology and the overwhelming presence of techno things. What I will be proposing is to replace Heideggerian unconcealment, aletheia, with Deleuzian counter-actualization as the central function of art. But again, we have to begin with Heidegger. In his famous example of the broken hammer, he illustrates the difference between ready-to-handness and present-at-handness, by indicating the former mode of relating to the tool is preferred, a mode in which the human being is not fully aware that she is using a tool separated from her body. But when Heidegger talks about technology and art, he then emphasizes their function to unconceal or to reveal being. There seems to be a moment of separation, short as it may be, from the day world, the subject from the day world, separated from the day world, das Man. The light that shines into the clearing that he, time and again, brings up, is especially telling. But when is this moment of separation? In other words, between the opposite movements of concealment and unconcealment, what happens in between? With due respect to the complexity of Heidegger's thought, my very rough description is meant to highlight that there seems to be something lacking or missing in his treatment of art, and for that matter, techniques in general. His emphasis is too much on the unconcealed truth, which in Deleuzean terms would be the actualized, but has neglected to provide a description of how this truth came about. The point about my intervening in this discussion of art with Deleuzean counteractualization is precisely meant to clarify this point and thereby shift the discussion of art and techniques away from the historical real, the actualized, or the unconcealed, to what Deleuze calls the virtual. Counteractualization is one-of-a-kind concept and an important conceptual breakthrough in modern Western thought. It builds a bridge between what Deleuze calls after Bergson, the actual and the virtual. In other words, between the transcendental realm and the historical world. To a certain extent, we can even argue that this mechanism solves the problem of correlationism initiated by Kant's argument of the impossibility of grasping the noumenal by means of reason, despite the fact that a burgeoning attempt to surpass the gap on the part of Kant could be detected in Kant's introduction of the sublime, which can cause the subject's cognitive apparatus to break up. Counteractualization is a move that brings the thinking person back from the actualized world to the virtual, or plane of immanence, where she is able to realign her relationship with the historical world in light of a larger or even unlimited vision and the urge to be creative. The end result could mean something like the Heideggerian unconcealment, though. But counteractualization does not come from nowhere. It has to be prompted by the event. As Deleuze remarks resolutely in The Logic of Sense, that ethics is, I quote, not to be unworthy of what comes upon us, unquote. And this, in turn, means to counteractualize. Here, what comes upon us is more often termed event. To counteractualize is to be worthy of the event. The Deleuzean notion of event is basically derived from the fundamental distinction made by the Stoics between two realms of being, a material realm of bodies and states of affairs, and an incorporeal realm of events. Thus, the event is on the one hand grounded in the body, and on the other, incorporeal and impersonal. The point about these two different understandings of event is that they make clear the two opposing processes enabled by the event, counteractualization caused by the event, and actualization of the event. Like the event, there are also two. Now I'm going to move on to talk about wound, which is inflicted by the event on the body. Like the event, there are two dimensions of the wound, the actual and the incorporeal. What this means is that while in actuality, a wound may be physical or emotional, the incorporeal wound reveals a fundamental crack, in Deleuze's own words, a crack, fundamental crack in the human being's existence, which is silently creeping and expanding until the right moment arrives for it to turn into an actualized crack. The wound, the bodily wound, or emotional wound. The incorporeal wound is immanence, or the virtual, which contains the eternal truth. But only with the articulation of these two cracks can the fundamental truth of the incorporeal wound be revealed. The crack here refers to the inner split of the human being, caused by her adoption of language and becoming subject. But the point about event is to actually render us aware of this crack or wound, so that schizoid or rhizomatic flights can be precipitated and we can be enabled to see the full range of possibilities on the plane of immanence. But how does counter-actualization actually work? In other words, how are we going to face up to an event and the wound it is definitely going to inflict upon us? The important thing is to actively search for the eternal side of our wounds. I'm quoting James Williams. And it is by means of connecting the two dimensions of the wound, the actual and the corporeal, that the patient thinker, the subject, in Deleuze's term, in this particular book, Logic of Sense, the patient thinker can be enabled to see the full range of possibilities of the immanence. But since not everyone is fit for eventual encounters, because most people just run away from these eventual encounters, the crack or wound is often papered over by the language system and conveniently serves as an easy stepping stone to the transcendent worldview, such as adopting a religion, for instance. Thus, there needs to be a more proactive approach to ensure the connection of the two dimensions, given that the wound would not let go and would not let go anyway, as there is necessarily a flaw in all things, because they matter, because they have a sense. I'm quoting James Williams again. What is advisable for us to do is follow steadfastly the advice of the Stoics to, again, I quote, become worthy of what happens to us or what comes upon us, unquote. And, again, I quote, will and release the event, unquote, from Deleuze and Guattari. But this proactive approach ironically presupposes that that one can adopt the principle of apparently passive attitude of amor fati in the face of the wound. What Nietzsche means by amor fati is to accept the result of any throw of dice, but try in the same breath to make the best of it. And this attempt presupposes the ability to counter-actualize, so as to avail oneself of all the virtual possibilities before deciding what next to do, or best to do. Thus, despite seeming like a passive acceptance of fate, acceptance of fate, it in fact involves a creative act that tries to find the best option for the current situation. And above all, this attempt requires a reformulation of the problem itself. You have a problem, and you usually just follow the conventional ways of dealing with the problem. But if you can counter-actualize, if you can adopt the attitude of amor fati, the strategy of amor fati, then it's possible for you to reformulate the problem. That is why, following Bergson, Deleuze argues that, I quote, true freedom lies in the power to decide, to constitute problems themselves. For Bergson, this freedom is even considered semi-divine, probably the only power that can be considered freedom, the only power that can be considered freedom. And this semi-divine power entails the disappearance of false problems as much as the creative upsurge of true ones. So reformulate the problem. Somewhat differently put, the greatest freedom, also, Deleuze's term, the greatest freedom is the freedom by which we develop and lead the event to its completion. There's an event, and you try to lead it to its completion, and that's freedom, the greatest freedom. And the whole point about Deleuze's philosophy is probably how to attain this freedom. And paradoxically, it can be attained only through amor fati. This is what, be worthy of the event truly means. But only the body without organs is able to adopt amor fati, love of fate, literally. This notion of body without organs, which echo closely the central notion of the Chinese Taoist classic. Actually, amor fati, you can associate with wu wei, non-action. They cohere with each other quite well. And in this particular case, I'm talking about the body without organs, and it's a central notion of the Chinese Taoist classic Zhuangzi. There's this very famous line, cut off your limbs, shut off your ears and eyes, abandon your body and intelligence, then you can merge with the great becoming. That's body without organs, right? So the central notion in Zhuangzi can be considered the obverse of counter-actualization. Body without organs should not be understood as a body literally deprived of organs, but a body rid of organismic organization or stratification and return to its intensive state. A state may not be the right word. In between the biological body and the organized body. It is, as Deleuze and Guattari observes, I quote, what remains after you take everything away, unquote. Obviously, this is the result of counter-actualization, as it dissolves identities and plunges us into chaosmos. In other words, one has to grasp oneself as an event. In Leonard Lawler's words, I quote, I understand myself not as an identity, but as two divergent and heterogeneous series. Me and the thing that causes the event. Or the thing that is the event. Or we can say that grasping oneself as an event is to grasp oneself as an unanswerable or unlimited question. This grasping liberates me from the determinate spatial-temporal determinations in which I find myself. It liberates me from the judgments of the divine present. Unquote. Thus, counter-actualization is the very mechanism for shutting off all constraints imposed by organism and moving toward the plane of consistency. But the body without organs never works alone. As a body without organs is pure intensities with its capacity to affect and being affected maximized, it is always in the process of becoming. And becoming is necessarily always becoming molecular, meaning it is molecularly affected by another body without organs, its counterpoint. It is through forming blocks of becoming, typically exemplified by that of a wasp and an orchid, that a body becomes a body without organs. We can thus conclude that what art does to the viewer is then, just like what Deleuze said about the experience of reading Spinoza, that it impacts her with an unprepared encounter, which can enable her to receive sudden illuminations. In typical Deleuzean language, the unprepared encounter is an event that inflicts a wound on the viewer and thereby shatters her subjectivity. The illuminations are what follows from the wound, the moments of accessing the plane of immanence by means of counter-actualization, the crucial move that articulates the actualized wound with the incorporeal wound. But for our purpose here, it's important to know that the ability to counter-actualize is not just a human trait. Since Deleuze himself uses the example of a cleft rock to give expression to the fact that even a rock has its own way of dealing with its crack. This seems to contradict Deleuze and Guattari's own exhortation that we need to, I quote, give birth to new modes of existence closer to animals and rocks, unquote. And this argument obviously indicates that animals and rocks have superior modes of existence in terms of believing in the world, of living closer to the plane of immanence. And they even argue in the same book that, I quote, whatever there is a contraction of past into present, there is a corresponding soul or micro-brain, unquote. And I quote again, not every organism has a brain, And not all life is organic, but everywhere there are forces that constitute microbrains, or an inorganic life of things, I quote, end quote. Sensation, according to him, according to Deleuze, is fundamentally such preservation, contraction, contemplation. Sensation, I quote, a sensation is pure contemplation, for it is through contemplation that one contracts. Contemplation is creating. The mystery of passive creation and sensation. So anything can contemplate, and therefore anything can create and, have as life. And so the cleft rock actually just indicates that all things use some kind of language, even though they are not human language. Definitely they are not human language. And in terms of having access to the plane of immanence, they can serve as paradigms for human beings, and that is why we need to create new modes of existence, closer to animals and rocks. As a result, it is important to note that not only humans, but all things can form blocks of becoming. In adopting the ethological approach to becoming, Deleuze and Guattari construed all things as bodies, which can be anything, natural or artificial, animate or inanimate, and interact with each other constantly. Bodies are not subject or substance, but modes, which are defined by the effects of which they are capable. So defined, a body is not a closure, but always already in relations with other bodies, constantly affecting and being affected. When Deleuze and Guattari uses the wasp and orchid to exemplify block of becoming, they actually suggest that any relationship between two bodies or two things can be one in which the parties involved function as art to each other. And it is in such a definition of body as body without organs, or haxiety or singularity, that we identify a brand new or which is post-humanist approach to how we should relate to the Techno-Thing. We relate to them as art. They are art, and we are art too. So we mutually function as art to each other. And it is in such a definition of body as body without organs, repeating myself. We relate to them, the Techno-Things as art, and they to us as art. Given that haxiety can be anything from an object, according to Deleuze and Guattari, from anything from an object to a season. In other words, anything. In their scheme, everything can be event and initiate counter-actualization. And the key is willing the event and becoming worthy of it. That is, seizing the opportunity afforded by haxieties, or body without organs, to counter-actualize. R has no essence. It is only difference from other things. Its only difference from other things is that its nature as event is not accidental. It was made to, produce, initiate events. Whereas anything else, all things in the world can be art too, when they are used as art, or when they're treated as art. Nevertheless, it is the function of willing the event that matters rather than the form of art. If we can actively will the event, then everything can function as art for us. While we can daily form blocks of becoming with anything and enrich as well as reform our life, both in an individual sense and in the collective sense, it is especially urgent to treat Techno-Things as art. That is, to will events from them. The reason is obvious. With the advent of generative AI, we can no longer predict the outcome from it. And that has turned techno-human relationship into a fetishistic one, like I already mentioned, in which human beings are being absorbed into the Techno-Thing. We are running the risk of losing our freedom and even life in the Techno-Thing. In Zhuangzi, again, there's a sentence called 物物而不物于物. You endear yourself to things, but you're not being enslaved by things. That's what we're going to do with the help from Deleuze and Guattari, as well as Chinese Taoism. We need to be able to see the Techno-Thing in the eye and will it to become an event, and so that there's no end. So that we can go through the process of connecting the two worlds, the body as well as the incorporeal, and becoming body without organs, and eventually regain freedom. The unlimited potential made available by actively willing the event is really why Deleuze says that the ultimate meaning of counter-actualization is universal freedom. The ultimate meaning of counter-actualization is universal freedom, or true freedom, or semi-divine freedom, or the greatest freedom. He used these different terms in the same book for universal freedom. For on the plane of immanence, everything, or not everything, but everything communicates freely and fully with each other. The doctrine of universality of being that Deleuze and Guattari has spent their whole career trying to complete is precisely, I call, a doctrine of radical anti-hierarchy, or a doctrine of radical equality among all things, which is, of course, reminiscent of the Zhuangzi, the Taoist classics, very famous concept of equaling all things. All things should be equaled. 齐物. As I'm finishing up a book on Deleuze and Taoism, it is difficult for me not to mention how this treating of Techno-Thing as art is time and again brought up and elaborated on in Taoist texts. Suffice it just to just mention one example, which is also the most well-known. And there's a butcher called Pao Ding this is a parable mentioned in Zhuangzi. In this parable, the protagonist is a butcher named Pao Ding, who is a very skillful butcher, who uses a knife for 19 years and never blunts it. So it's still, after 19 years, still like new. So the king summons him to the court to give a demonstration, and being so impressed, praises him about his technique. But Pao Ding answers, what I like is the Tao, T-A-O, instead of techniques. When I dissect oxen, I encounter them with my Shen, temporarily translated as spirit, but the term spirit here is totally unlike the Western spirit. I encounter them with my spirit rather than with my eyes. My organs stop functioning. In other words, having become a body without organs. Whereas my spirit moves on. Okay. What does this spirit mean here? Actually, we should get to know another Taoist or Chinese concept called qi, vital forces. Here, all through Zhuangzi as well as Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu. Shen just means something like qi. So when your organs kind of melt away, what you have left is pure intensities, vital forces. And of course, at this moment, you blend completely. Not blend. Blend is not the right way. Yeah. You become. You form a block of becoming with the knife. And that's why, like in the Deleuze and Guattari and Body Without Organs, in Taoism, there are also two kinds of body. The organized social body and the qi body, the intensive body, body with organs. With the latter being the counterpart of body with organs. It is obvious that Paul Ding has become a body with organs such that he is able to deftly use a knife as if it were part of his intensive body. In other words, Paul Ding and his knife have formed, like I already said, a block of becoming, functioning as event art/art to each other. In other words, unlike ordinary butchers who have to replace their blunted knife every once in a while with a new one, Paul Ding in his block of becoming has become singularities or pure intensities, and thereby achieve universal freedom where isolated identities no longer impinge on each other. Leading such a mode of existence will be inobtrusive and caring to every body, not everybody, everybody and everything. Let me just tell the story, or retell the story, or talk about the lesson of that particular story, which I already told to the participants of our workshop. I hope you don't mind, I repeat it. To illustrate universal freedom, Deleuze uses the short story written by Jorge Luis Borges, The Garden of Fork and Path. In that story, the protagonist is a Chinese professor of English, like me. I always ask my students, why do they choose? Why did Borges choose this particular person as the protagonist of the story? Of course, I tell them that it's because Chinese is very smart, professor of English especially smart. So this combination makes him, the most appropriate hero of this story, because he has to really, figure out how to actually transmit a message to his German boss under very difficult circumstances. Okay, this guy named Yu Chun was originally a professor of English in Qingdao, Shandong, in China. But since, back in those days, Qingdao was a German colony. And so he was somehow forced into becoming a spy for the Germans during the First World War. And so he went to Britain to figure out the location of a specific artillery park, which the British have prepared in order to counterattack the Germans. And so he went there with a German ally, Sonnenberg. But one day he just received this phone call from Sonnenberg's number and realized that it was a British guy, actually a Scottish guy, speaking from the other end. So he realized that Sonnenberg was killed already. And with one bullet in his handgun, revolver, he began to think how to. He already got the message, correct information, but there's no way for him to transmit the information back to Germany, because the wireless thing is in the other room, in his colleague's room. So he has to figure out how to, transmit this place name called Albert to his German boss. All right, he figured out a very smart way by going to someone's named Stephen Albert's place, and he wanted to kill him. so that it would be on the news the next day, and then it's very clever. Since he was killed by this person, by Yu Sun, then his German boss would realize that it must be either Stephen or Albert. so he went to this place and meets Stephen Albert and realized that he's a sinologist. And on top of that, his research was on Yu Sun's grandfather's work, a long novel, totally unwieldy long novel. And his grandfather was originally a governor of Yunnan, but then suddenly resigned in order to, on the one hand, build a labyrinth, and on the other, to write a long novel. Yeah. But after he died, nobody could figure out where the labyrinth actually is located. The novel is there, but it's a totally messy draft. Nobody could figure out the logic of the novel because people die and then become alive again. And there's no logic to it, and there's no coherence either. So Stephen Albert, when he realizes that it was the grandson of this particular person, Chiwen, he then explains to him, why the labyrinth is nowhere to find, because the labyrinth is the novel. So the two things in one. And the importance about this work of his grandfather is that he actually he wrote this novel in order to exemplify that time constantly forks. So there are all kinds of parallel worlds. And in some worlds, we are friends, but in another world, we may be enemies. Yeah. That's what he says to Yu Sun. Yeah. But having known that actually, in other words, Yu Sun is presented with all unlimited possibilities, unlimited possible choices concerning the present problem that he has, which is to transmit the message. What he can do, if he's truly counter-actualized, what he can do is choose among the myriad choices that is available to him. And what he has to do is reformulate the problem. The problem does not have to be one about transmitting the message to his German boss. Could be anything. Could be how to survive, right? If you want to survive, then you can surrender. It's very easy, right? But for him, a deeply colonized mind, the future already exists. There's so many futures, but he can only choose one because the problem remains the same. To solve that same problem, that old problem, the best way is to kill Stephen Albert. Yeah. But it doesn't make sense to kill someone who's done so much for his native country, so much for his grandfather. Killing him, and he wouldn't be able to survive either. Right? So that's the problem of not being able to counter-actualize. If can actually completely counter-actualize, then you are able to reformulate your problem, and then you can find the best choice, a best decision as to how to handle that problem. All right, so this is all I'm going to talk about today, and I welcome questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Liao, for a very exciting and also coherent presentation of the idea of the poetics of womb. So now the floor is open to the audience. Any questions or comments? Responses? Okay, this gentleman over there, Hong Xiong, Professor Li.
Okay. 老师, thank you very much for your inspiring talk. Well, I'm interested to know about some maybe complexity that is involved in the topic. She had 3 keywords. One is the wound, right, relation to the event. And from my own understanding, the event somehow should pertain to the plane of consistency, which is also the plane of thought, right? And then the second keyword is arts. And according to Deleuze and Guattari, arts, the plane, its plane is the plane of composition. So somehow the plane of composition is different from the plane of consistency. So on the one hand, there is this difference of tension between thoughts and arts, between the plane of consistency and the plane of composition. And the third thing is the Techno-Thing. Because according to what is philosophy, you see that Deleuze and Guattari kind of presents the 3 planes, right? And the last plane is in relation to science or technology. And that is the plane of functionality. So you see that just in your topic have these 3 different planes, right? And then in your talk, you somehow move between kind of in a very fluent way between arts and thought, between events and, well, in terms of arts, if we say that art it belongs to the plane of composition, then maybe we can describe it as it's rather than the body without organs. If we take the body without organs as belonging to a plane of consistency, then the plane of composition should be the ability for organs to form many different bodies. Right? So I'm interested to know your thoughts about these possible connections or tensions, or maybe some possible kind of interactions between these 3 different things. Other one is the wound, which from my own understanding should be closer to the virtue or thought. And the second thing is art, which should be closer to the plane of composition. And then that's technology, which is our ability to find solutions. Okay,
all right. What is the sentence about forming many
bodies? Because we're talking about
many body without organs.
Yeah.
Many body without organs.
Art is about the possibility to form different assemblages between different things, right? So it should be about the ability for organs to form different bodies. That's why it's called the plane of composition instead of the plane of consistency.
What do you mean
that's my understanding.
What do you mean by organs forming bodies?
Like your example, right, between the orchid and the wasp.
Right.
So that is a way to form a different body, right?
Right, but they are not organs. See, they are things. They are things. When they form the block of becoming, they become hexietes. Rather than, I mean, I don't know why you say they're organs. But anyway, let's start from the very beginning. You were saying that, I mean, in logic of sense, it's very clearly that there are 2 kinds of wounds, right? The incorporeal and the bodily. But events too. Events don't, I mean, there are 2 kinds of events. Historical events, as well as incorporeal events. So you can't just say that events belong to the plane of immanence. All right? So we just have to remember that, if events inflict wounds, but they both, there's a fundamental one or eternal one, according to, they sometimes use that term. I think he says time and again that you have to articulate these 2 in order to, find the truth, right? And the example he gives is Joe Pusky. He's wounded, he's bedridden. This is the physical wound. But then, to figure out the meaning of this wound, in other words, to cope with this wound, or become worthy of this wound, then you need to, event as well as wound. But they're just, maybe you can consider them 2 sides of one coin. So you have to figure out its relationship, or at least discover that there's another more fundamental one, which is the incorporeal, which actually is the plane of immanence. So the articulation of these 2 is the key to understanding your womb, or to come to terms with your womb, or cope with your womb. Yeah. Otherwise, you just ressentiment, resentment. Because why me? especially, I mean, the wound doesn't have to be bodily. It could be just losing your girlfriend. So why me? Why would this happen to me? Ressentiment. But maybe you can take the opportunity to understand what love is, what love truly is. And that's the counter-actualization. You reformulate the problem. Then you may feel very bad, very good. Like, you become the master of love. From then on, you're going to be preaching how to love. So I'm just kidding, but what's the next question?
The relationship between the three things or the three plans.
Oh, okay. I think this is I mean, in logical sense, this is not really distinguished, I would say. And I think even in what is philosophy, I think this distinction was maybe made in order not to make art too, prestigious. But I tend to think that art is in their mind, art may be something that, philosophy has to become like art in order to really be philosophy, right? To think the most inside and the outermost outside, that's art. That only art can do that. What I'm doing in my essay is precisely to make everything art, rather than limit art to a certain kind of. I mean, even when I think sometimes, especially for instance in cinema books, I think Deleuze has a tendency to try to essentialize art. Telling us that art has a certain essence. I mean, it may not be wrong, but this essence could be found in all things. So that's the essence of art. Counteractualize, the ability to counteractualize, to provide events, to inflict wounds. Yeah. If you can see that, or even will the event from anything, then they become art. That's my point. See, when Deleuze talks about machines, there's no difference between all these different kinds of machines, except maybe the abstract machine. And all machines work by breaking down, right? It's not just the artistic machine that work by breaking down. All machines, if they truly work. But the moment they truly work, they become art. Yeah. So that's why facing this predicament of masses of people becoming fetishistic worshippers, it's especially, I think, urgent for us to distance ourselves from these techno-things in a Deleuzian way, which is, treating them as event, rather than just use them in a ready-to-hand manner. So I sometimes wonder why ready-to-hand is a superior mode than present-at-hand. But the problem is that present-at-hand definitely is not that attractive either, right? But there's something in between. I think that's what's lacking in Heidegger. And Deleuze and Guattari, simply just fill in that blank. Yeah. All right.
Thank you. I think the discussion is becoming interesting. Any other questions? Yes, this gentleman over there.
Thank you so much for your talk.
Adam, is that you?
During your discussion of counter-actualization, you use a lot of terminology from Nietzsche with the throw of the dice, amor fati, and I was just wondering if you viewed, and you also talked about how for Deleuze and Guattari, the goal is to to allow us to achieve the true freedom and the power to decide as being like one of the goals of their project. I was just wondering if your usage of amor fati implies that you also position this discussion of counteractualization on the trajectory of like Deleuze's interpretation of the Overman and the Übermensch in Nietzschean philosophy, where he characterizes it in a multitude of ways, but including like a new way of feeling, a new way of thinking, and a new way of evaluating through transvaluation, especially where he talks about how for Nietzsche, his philosophy is not characterized by the true or the real, but rather transvaluation, evaluation. And your discussion of the body without organs seems to kind of point towards almost like a transitory stage where we are approaching a becoming Overman or a becoming Übermensch. But I just wondered if I was reading too much into it, or if you felt that your project is situated in this direction.
I wasn't really thinking about Übermensch. No, but but certainly, of course, amor fati is, I think, at least. I think Deleuze kind of just completely adopt the definition of amor fati from Nietzsche, right? And so for this term and ideas related to this particular term, yes, I borrow from, I use the Deleuzean interpretation, but which he borrowed from Deleuze. What's the second question?
Just that if you, with your usage of...
the transitory stage, right? Transitory, it is, of course, a transitory stage. But you can, once you counteractualized, you have to reactualize eventually. But we can, and it's not very difficult. It's not very easy anyway. So that's why we need to adopt a kind of a proactive attitude toward the event. We better try to will the event. But it's, to become the body with the organs, according to them, it's sometimes easy, sometimes difficult, sometimes quick, sometimes slow. So you can never know whether or not you would succeed in becoming a body with organs. But it's definitely transitory. But that is like, if you're familiar with the ritual theory. The ritual theory is like from a social role to liminality, then back to the social role. It's kind of like that. And liminality is the kind of sea of energy where you can, from which you can reinvigorate yourself. Thank you.
Okay, allow me to use the privilege of being a chair to ask the last question and bring Professor Liao's discussion to the pragmatic aspect. As you talk about reformulating the questions, I can't help thinking about giving prompts to GenAI. And then Professor Liao, when he talks about the three plans, the plan of consistency seems to be LLM, large language models, while the plan of composition, the programming languages, and then the plan of the immanent, when we raise questions and give prompts to GenAI. So I wonder if you have this in mind when you give your talk.
No, I don't. Okay, but I'll think about these interesting interpretations.
Yeah, that should be interesting thing to continue to discuss.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.